The rain had been falling steadily over Surrey for 3 days when the telegram reached Hercule Poirot. It was short and cryptic. "Tragedy at Briarwood Manor. Please come at once. Your discretion required. Lady Whitcomb." Poirot folded the message neatly, his eyes narrowing with quiet curiosity. Briarwood Manor, he recalled, was an estate known for its grand gardens and more than one family scandal whispered over tea tables in London. Yet this message had an urgency beyond social embarrassment. Within hours, he and Captain Hastings were on the early train to Guildford, the countryside blurring past under sheets of rain. They arrived at dusk. Briarwood rose ahead of them like a silhouette of morning, its windows glinting weakly behind curtains of mist. A butler with tremulous hands led them into the drawing-room, where the household gathered in strained silence. Lady Whitcomb, tall, pale, her face drawn with grief, stood beside the fireplace. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "there has been a death. My husband, Sir Reginald Whitcomb, was found this morning in his study. The door was locked from the inside." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Locked, you say? And yet, he did not take his own life, I think." Her fingers tightened around a handkerchief. "The police believe he did, but I know my husband. He would never." Inspector Graves of the local constabulary was present, a man with a ruddy face and suspicious eyes. "We found Sir Reginald slumped over his desk," he said, a revolver on the floor beside him, one shot to the heart. "The room was locked, the key still inside, windows bolted, no sign of forced entry. Frankly, it's as simple as it looks." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, but appearances, mon ami, are the most deceptive of all. May I see the room?" The study was small and severe, its dark oak panels soaked with the scent of tobacco and old paper. On the desk, ink had spilled across correspondence. Poirot moved slowly, his patent leather shoes whispering against the carpet. He examined the revolver first. It lay awkwardly near the chair, too far from the hand that should have dropped it. "Curious," he murmured. "And what of this?" He pointed to a crushed violet petal on the carpet, a single, vivid fragment of colour against the gloom. "Lady Whitcomb," he asked, "did your husband keep flowers here?" She shook her head. "No, never. He detested them." Poirot's gaze shifted toward the fireplace, where faint traces of ash smouldered. Kneeling, he stirred them gently with the poker and uncovered a half-burned photograph, the face too charred to identify. "Someone wished to erase a memory," he said quietly. Inspector Graves snorted. "A quarrel with his wife, a bout of despair, and a pistol within reach seems quite straightforward." "Non," Poirot said, straightening. "When the facts seem too straightforward, it is the mind that must suspect." As they returned to the hall, Hastings whispered, "What do you think, Poirot? Suicide made to look like murder, or murder made to look like suicide?" Poirot's lips curved. "That, my friend, is the question. But already the balance tips toward design. Observe. Why lock the door at all? To keep someone out or to delay discovery? And that violet petal, too delicate a clue for a man about to die." Dinner that evening was a tense affair. Seated around the long table were the remaining residents of Briarwood. Lady Whitcomb's brother, Colonel Everard Grant, a stern military man with a scarred cheek, Miss Clara Whitcomb, the daughter, whose trembling hands betrayed her poise, and Mr. Lionel Dacre, the estate secretary, a smooth, unreadable figure with a habit of adjusting his spectacles before speaking. Each wore grief as though rehearsed for the occasion. "Sir Reginald had been distracted these past weeks," Lady Whitcomb said faintly. "He received letters from London, though he never spoke of them. Yesterday he was agitated. I heard him pacing in his study late into the night." "Letters, you say?" Poirot leaned forward. "Might I see them?" "I burned them," she admitted. "He told me they were nothing." Hastings frowned. "You burned them before his death?" "Yes," she whispered, "at his request." Poirot's brow furrowed. A man asks that his correspondence be destroyed on the eve of his death. Intriguing. And the maid who discovered him, she saw nothing unusual? "Only that the fire was still warm," said Graves, "which fits with him shooting himself early this morning." Poirot tapped a finger thoughtfully against his chin. "No, my friend, not early this morning. The fire was too strong, the ash too clean. It burned longer than the hour of his death." Later, as the household retired, Poirot and Hastings lingered in the corridor. The detective's eyes shone with quiet intensity. It begins to take shape, he murmured. There is order beneath this chaos. Someone locked that door, not to keep out discovery, but to give themselves time. And somewhere in this house is the owner of a violet bloom. At dawn, Poirot rose early and walked through the mist to the conservatory. Dew clung to the petals of hundreds of orchids, roses and violets tended by the gardener, old Tom Wicks. "You grow these all year?" Poirot asked pleasantly. "Mostly for Miss Clara," the man replied. "She takes them into the house sometimes. Pretty things, aren't they?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, yes, beauty, but with thorns." When he returned to the manor, a commotion awaited him. The butler, pale and trembling, had found something odd, a handkerchief embroidered with initials LD, tucked behind the study's curtains. Poirot took it gently. The scent of violets lingered faintly in the fabric. He looked toward the door of the secretary's room. "Monsieur Dacre," he said softly, "you and we must have a little conversation." And as the clock struck 9, Poirot knew that beneath the genteel silence of Briarwood Manor, a very deliberate hand had arranged every detail of Sir Reginald's death. The locked door, the burned photograph, the crushed petal, all part of a puzzle whose edges were finally beginning to gleam in the grey morning light. Poirot stood at the edge of Sir Reginald's study, the morning light filtering weakly through the misted windows. Dust motes swirled in the air like suspended thoughts. Inspector Graves was busy instructing his men to take final measurements and notes for the coroner, but Poirot paid him little mind. His eyes, sharp and deliberate, moved across the room in slow arcs. Every inch of carpet, every misplaced object, every trace of disorder carried significance to him. He crouched beside the desk once more, gazing not at the gun or the blood, but at the faint circle left by a missing glass on the polished surface. There was no glass in the room now. Curious, he murmured to himself. A man about to die? Would he trouble himself to drink beforehand? Or did another raise a glass to him, one last toast before the deed? Hastings, who had been quietly observing, frowned. Surely, Poirot, the glass could have been taken away after. Perhaps the butler. "Non, mon ami," Poirot interrupted gently, "for look at the ring. The condensation is still faintly visible, fresh, as though the glass stood here not long before we arrived. The butler was with us in the hall when we entered. Someone else took it." Graves overheard, his tone dismissive. "You're reading shadows, Monsieur Poirot. The case is plain. Locked room, suicide, grief-stricken man, no sign of struggle." Poirot only smiled, his gaze sliding toward the small framed picture on the far shelf, a portrait of Sir Reginald, Lady Whitcomb, and their daughter Clara. He picked it up delicately, turning it slightly toward the light. "And yet, Inspector, you notice nothing strange about this?" Graves frowned. "A family photograph. What of it?" Poirot turned the frame to reveal the thin layer of dust behind it. It was moved recently. The outline remains on the wall where it hung for years, yet this angle hides the mark left by the nail. Someone replaced it hastily, and badly. He returned the frame to its place. Someone entered this room after the death. The door was locked, yes, but perhaps locked by the one who left through another way. "The windows were sealed," said Graves curtly. "So they appeared," Poirot corrected, stepping toward one of the large casement windows. His fingers traced the latch, clean, polished. "And yet, all else here gathers dust. Tell me, my friend, why polish this small brass latch amid such neglect?" He raised an eyebrow, letting the silence hang before turning away. No. Something here was opened and then shut again by a very careful hand." When the inspector left in irritation, Poirot walked with Hastings down the corridor, passing oil portraits of Whitcomb's past, grim faces trapped in varnish and time. "The first deception has already shown itself," Poirot said quietly. "It is not in words, but in gestures. You saw how Lady Whitcomb trembled when I mentioned the fire in the grate." "Yes," Hastings replied, "though I thought that only natural. She's grieving." Grief, mon cher, may shake the heart, but not the hands when they are accustomed to concealment. Her trembling was of another kind. There was something in that photograph, perhaps someone she wished us not to see. They found Lady Whitcomb seated in the morning room, pale and motionless beside the window. The scent of violets drifted faintly from the vase near her elbow. Poirot inclined his head courteously. "Madame, forgive the intrusion. I come only to ask. A small detail, nothing more. Did your husband keep a diary?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the secretary's desk before she answered. He did, yes, but it was private. I have not looked. Ah, Poirot said softly. Yet perhaps someone else has. I noticed the lock of that desk has been forced. It is old, delicate, easily overlooked. Her breath caught. I had not seen that. Then perhaps, Poirot murmured, it was forced before this morning. He left her to her thoughts, but Hastings caught the faint colour that rose to her cheeks. As they exited, Poirot paused again near the stairwell. Hastings, he whispered, observed the footprints on the carpet runner. 2 sets, one heavier, turning toward the study, the other lighter, smaller, following but not returning. That smaller one is a woman's shoe, likely last night, for the indentations are still fresh. Hastings bent down, astonished. By Jove, Poirot, you're right. But how could she have left if the door was locked from the inside? Poirot gave a small shrug, eyes gleaming. That is the question, is it not? A question I intend to put to our friend Monsieur Dac. They found the secretary in his room, sleeves rolled, spectacles glinting as he pretended to organise papers. Poirot studied him a moment before speaking. Monsieur Dac, you worked for Sir Reginald long, yes? 3 years, Dacre replied smoothly. A fine man, demanding, but fair. Poirot's gaze dropped to the man's cufflinks. Gold, engraved with initials, L.D. He smiled faintly. And loyal, I'm sure. Tell me, did you ever take dictation from Sir Reginald late at night? Dacre's expression flickered. Occasionally, he worked at odd hours. And last night, I retired early. Poirot's tone softened, almost conversational. Yet your handkerchief, mon ami, found itself in his study. Did it go walking on its own? A shadow passed over Dacre's face. It must have fallen there another time. I often brought him documents. Poirot nodded, still pleasant. Perhaps. But one more thing. The scent of violets upon it. Very faint. You see, I am curious, for Lady Wickham says her husband detested flowers. Dacre's hand moved to adjust his spectacles again. I cannot explain that. Mais oui, Poirot said gently, and yet you do not deny it. The silence lingered like a held breath. Poirot's eyes flicked briefly to a vase on Dacre's table, empty, but with a faint ring of purple where water once stood. He said nothing further, only smiled courteously and withdrew. When they were alone again, Hastings whispered, You think Dacre did it? Poirot shook his head slowly. I think, my friend, that Monsieur Dacre is a man who fears discovery but not guilt. He hides something, yes, but perhaps not murder. You see, the true deception here is more subtle. It blooms quietly, like the violet. They stepped once more into the corridor, the manor now bathed in cold afternoon light. Poirot paused beside the grandfather clock, watching the pendulum swing. The first lies, he said softly, have been told with trembling lips, but the truth, the truth waits patiently. Soon she will reveal herself. As the clock struck noon, a maid appeared, pale and frightened, clutching an envelope. For you, sir, she whispered. Poirot took it, unfolding the paper carefully. Inside was a single sheet bearing only 2 words, written in a hurried, unfamiliar hand. Ask the daughter. Poirot's eyes glimmered with sudden interest. At last, he murmured, the thread grows visible. And somewhere in Briarwood Manor, the echo of that unseen hand's warning stirred the silence like a breath in the fog. Poirot sat in the drawing-room of Briarwood Manor, his small frame poised and immaculate amid the gloom of the great house. A faint drizzle tapped against the tall windows, a sound both rhythmic and uneasy. On the table before him lay the mysterious note. 2 words that had turned the tide of his thoughts. Ask the daughter. He held it between finger and thumb, studying the handwriting, the ink, the tremor in each letter. Someone had written it in haste but not panic. A steady hand pressed by fear of discovery. Hastings stood by the fireplace, restless, watching Poirot's stillness. At last Poirot spoke softly. Mon ami, deceit is like perfume. It lingers in the air even after its source has gone. Here, in this house, everyone wears a scent not their own. He slipped the note into his pocket and rose. We will speak with Mademoiselle Clara now. It is time to hear her song. They found Clara in the music room, seated at the piano. Her fingers rested on the keys, but produced no sound, She looked up when Poirot entered, her expression calm but distant, like someone walking through fog. "Monsieur Poirot," she said quietly, "I suppose you've come to ask about last night." "Yes, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, his voice warm but precise. "I have spoken with the others, but each tells a story incomplete, like a melody missing its final note. Perhaps you can help me find the harmony." Clara hesitated. "I don't know how much help I can be. I went to bed early. Father and Mr. Dacre were still in the study." "Ah," said Poirot, "and what hour was that?" "10:30. I remember because I heard the clock strike as I passed the landing." Poirot nodded slowly. "And after? You did not hear voices, movement, the sound of a quarrel, perhaps?" She shook her head, eyes cast downward. "No, only the rain. It was very loud last night." He observed her closely. The rhythm of her breathing, the way her hands gripped the edge of the piano stool. Her composure was too deliberate. "And yet," he murmured, "the rain did not drown out the sound of a shot, I think. The police tell me no one heard it." "I sleep deeply," she said quickly, too quickly. I suppose I did not notice." Poirot's gaze softened but did not relent. "Mademoiselle, do you wear perfume?" She blinked, startled. "Sometimes." "Violet?" A pause, brief but heavy. "Yes. How did you know?" Poirot smiled faintly, bowing his head. "A small observation, that is all. You have been most helpful, mademoiselle." As they stepped out into the corridor, Hastings spoke in a low voice. "You think she's hiding something, Poirot?" "Ah, Hastings," Poirot replied. "She hides many things, some perhaps from herself. But the scent of violet tells me she was near her father's study last night. The question, you see, is not whether she was there, but why." Later, Poirot requested the presence of Colonel Grant in the library. The old soldier entered stiffly, his boots clacking against the polished floor, his eyes cold and watchful. He carried himself like a man used to command, and used to concealing what he knew. "Colonel," said Poirot, "you were close to your brother-in-law, yes?" "Close enough," the colonel replied. "Reginald was a stubborn man, but he loved my sister. That's what matters." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet, I sense you did not always agree with him. You're a man of action, while he was a man of property. Such men, they often quarrel over principles, and money, perhaps." Grant's jaw tightened. "You're wasting time, sir. Reginald managed his affairs well enough. I had no interest in his fortune." "Of course," Poirot said smoothly. "But you were aware of his intention to alter his will?" The colonel froze. "Alter it? No." Poirot smiled gently. "Then it will surprise you to learn that the solicitor confirmed such a change was being prepared. Sir Reginald had requested an appointment in London next week to finalise it." The colonel's colour darkened. "If that's true, I know nothing of it." He turned sharply, as though to end the conversation, but Poirot's soft voice followed him. "One last question, monsieur. Last night, you retired at what hour?" "Shortly after 10. "And you heard nothing unusual?" "Nothing." Poirot's gaze lingered. "Strange. For a man trained to wake at the sound of danger, sleep must have come easily indeed." The colonel's eyes flickered, just once, then hardened again. "You have a sharp tongue, sir. I'd watch where you use it." He left without another word. When the door closed, Hastings exhaled. "He's hiding something, all right." "Mais oui," Poirot said thoughtfully. "But not guilt. Pride, perhaps. Or fear of something worse than guilt. Shame." In the afternoon, Poirot summoned Lady Whitcomb once more. The rain had ceased, leaving the house steeped in silence. She entered slowly, her veil still drawn, her every step deliberate. "You wish to see me, Monsieur Poirot?" "Yes, madame," he said, gesturing toward a chair. "It is about the fire in your husband's study. You told me he burned letters, yes?" She nodded. "He insisted on it, said they were unimportant." "Ah," said Poirot softly, "but perhaps they were too important. Tell me, madam, did you see to the fire yourself?" She hesitated. "No, I believe Lionel did. My husband asked him to." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Monsieur Dacre again? How devoted he was to your husband. Or was it to someone else in this house?" She stiffened. "What do you mean?" He rose, walking slowly around her chair. "A man burns another's letters, retrieves a handkerchief scented with violet, and fears the name of a young woman who plays the piano in the dark. There is a triangle here, madam. Sharp enough to wound 3 hearts, her voice trembled. You are mistaken. I rarely am, said Poirot gently. But tell me, if I am wrong, why did you hide that your husband's revolver had not been touched for months? The oil on the trigger is fresh, too fresh. It was cleaned, not by him, but by another hand within the last day. Lady Whitcomb rose, her composure breaking. You have no right to accuse me. I accuse no one, said Poirot calmly. I merely observe. Lies, you see, are like threads. When one pulls, the whole fabric begins to unravel. She turned away, her voice low and bitter. You don't understand what this house has become. Secrets, debts, whispers. Reginald was not the man you think. Poirot inclined his head. Then perhaps you will help me to understand him. She gave a weary sigh. He had enemies. He always did, even in his own family. When she'd gone, Poirot sat once more in silence. Hastings watched him, uneasy. They're all lying, Poirot. Every one of them. Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes glinting. Non, Hastings. Not all. Only some lie with words. The rest, they lie with silence. He opened his notebook and wrote 3 names in careful order. Clara, Dacre, Lady Whitcomb. Then, beneath them, 2 small words. Violet petal. The truth, he murmured, hides behind their contradictions. It is patient, but it cannot be silenced forever. Someone in this house knows how the impossible was done. He looked toward the window, where the fog was returning, curling like breath against the glass. And soon, he said softly, they will speak, whether they wish to or not. The rain had stopped by morning, but a heavy mist still wrapped Briarwood Manor in its grey shroud. Poirot stood by the tall window of the drawing-room, his reflection caught faintly in the glass. Behind him, the remnants of breakfast sat untouched on a tray, cold tea, an abandoned slice of toast. The house, once elegant, now carried an unease that hung in the air like damp linen. Somewhere within its walls, truth and deceit were coiled tightly together, waiting for the right hand to pull them apart. Hastings entered quietly, holding a sheaf of notes. I've been through everyone's statements again, Poirot. They all say the same thing. Sir Reginald was alive when they last saw him, and none of them heard the gunshot. It's as though the man simply ceased to exist. Poirot turned, his gaze sharp and knowing. Non, mon ami. No one ceases to exist. The universe does not allow disappearance without exchange. If one truth vanishes, another appears to take its place. He gestured toward the notes. Let us examine then what these fine people have given us in exchange for their silence. He sat, arranging the papers with meticulous care. Lady Whitcomb, he began softly. She speaks of her husband's agitation, his secrecy, his letters. A wife frightened, perhaps. But of what? A scandal? Or discovery? Hastings nodded. She seems genuinely shaken. Poirot smiled faintly. Oui, but the grief of the innocent and the guilt of the clever, they share the same mask. We must look beneath. He placed a hand on another sheet. Monsieur Dacre, his devotion too perfect, his explanations too smooth. A secretary who burns letters and loses scented handkerchiefs does not serve without purpose. If he loved Lady Whitcomb, there is jealousy. If he loved her daughter, there is fear. If he loved neither, there is something darker, ambition. Hastings frowned thoughtfully. And Colonel Grant? Ah, the soldier, Poirot mused. He lies badly, but not with malice. His pride is his armour, his past his weakness. Money? No. But perhaps reputation. He hides something that could ruin his name. Poirot's gaze sharpened. A quarrel, maybe. One not about inheritance, but honour. He picked up the final page. And Mademoiselle Clara. She tells us of early sleep and silence, yet her perfume lingers near the scene of death. She trembles when asked about her father's will, and her eyes, Hastings... Ah, her eyes. They flickered not at sorrow but at shame. Hastings exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. You think she's involved? I think, Poirot said quietly, that she has seen something she dare not confess. Whether from guilt or love, that remains to be seen. He leaned back, fingertips pressed together. Observe, Hastings. Each has a motive, each a reason to wish Sir Reginald dead. But no single theory binds them all. A man is not killed by 4 hands at once. Somewhere in this tangle lies one clear thread. We must find it." Their conversation was interrupted by a hesitant knock at the door. It was the butler, his expression uncertain. "Beg pardon, sir, but Inspector Graves is here again. Says he's uncovered something." Poirot's brows rose. "Ah, let us hear what our diligent inspector has found." Graves entered with his usual bluntness. "Morning, gentlemen. Thought I'd best let you know. We found something odd in the stable loft. A box of old documents belonging to Sir Reginald. Seems he'd been receiving payments, regular ones, from a company in London. Whitcomb Investments. But the firm hasn't existed for nearly 3 years." "3 years?" Poirot repeated, eyes narrowing. "And yet the payments continued?" "Exactly," Graves said grimly. "Which means someone was sending them under false pretences. Fraud, perhaps blackmail. The amounts were large." Poirot nodded slowly, deep in thought. "And where are these documents now?" "In my car. I was going to take them back to the station." "Non, non," Poirot said gently, rising. "Leave them with me for now. You see, my dear Inspector, numbers do not lie. But the people who write them, they lie with extraordinary grace." When Graves had gone, Poirot began sifting through the papers. Each cheque bore a faint signature, always different but written in the same hand. "Look, Hastings," he said softly. "The handwriting trembles, yet not from age, rather from disguise. Someone close to Sir Reginald was paying him for silence, but silence about what?" By late afternoon, Poirot requested that each member of the household meet him in the drawing-room once more. The fire was lit this time, though the warmth did little to ease the tension. They arrived one by one, Lady Whitcomb, pale and composed, Colonel Grant, gruff and irritated, Clara, anxious and distant, and Lionel Dacre, who appeared calm but whose eyes darted constantly toward the door. Poirot stood before them, hands clasped behind his back. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began softly, "you will forgive me for this intrusion into your grief, but I am a man of order, and in the events of this house there is no order, only confusion. Let us bring a little light. Yes." Lady Whitcomb spoke first, her voice trembling. "What more do you want from us, Monsieur Poirot? Haven't you asked enough questions?" "Not quite," Poirot said gently. "You see, I ask only those that are necessary. Tell me, madame, did your husband suspect someone in this household of betrayal?" She looked startled. He may have. He said little to me in those last days." "And yet he burned letters," Poirot murmured. "Letters that would have revealed something. Perhaps from London, from a business partner." Her lips parted, but no answer came. Clara turned away, her hands twisting in her lap. Poirot's gaze shifted to the Colonel. "And you, monsieur, you spoke of loyalty, yet you did not mention the quarrel you had with Sir Reginald 3 nights ago. You see, I found a broken glass in the garden. Your brand of whiskey, I think." Grunt stiffened. "He insulted my service, that's all. Said my regiment's honour was bought by his investments. We argued, but I left before midnight." "Ah," Poirot said softly. "And what of the revolver?" "A weapon registered under your name, not Sir Reginald's, was found in the room. You lent it to him, did you not?" The Colonel's face reddened. "Yes, damn it. He said he wanted it for protection. I thought nothing of it." "Très bien," Poirot said quietly. "And Monsieur Dacre, your turn. You spoke of loyalty also. But loyalty to whom? Your employer, or the woman you serve even more faithfully?" Dacre's composure wavered. "I don't know what you mean." Poirot stepped closer, voice gentle but unrelenting. "You mean you do not know whether it was Lady Whitcomb or her daughter you loved? Ah, mon ami, I think you know it very well." A flicker of fear crossed Dacre's face. Clara made a small, strangled sound, and Lady Whitcomb's gloved hand gripped the armrest so tightly that the leather creaked. Poirot turned slowly, his tone calm once more. "There are many motives in this room: jealousy, greed, vengeance, fear. But the one I seek is not emotion. It is design. For the killer of Sir Reginald Whitcomb didn't act in passion. They acted with precision." The room fell silent, the crackling of the fire the only sound. Poirot's eyes lingered on each face in turn, seeing the tremors beneath the surface, the tiny betrayals of breath and heartbeat. "Somewhere," he said softly, "there lies a secret worth killing for. A secret hidden not in the heart but in the mind. I shall find it, and when I do, mes amis, even the walls of Briarwood will not keep it from me." Outside the fog thickened again, pressing against the windows like something alive. Within the manor, silence reigned once more, but it was no longer the silence of grief. It was the silence of waiting. The fog that clung to Briarwood Manor the following morning seemed thinner, as though the house itself had exhaled after days of suffocating silence. Inspector Graves arrived before breakfast, boots heavy with the mud of the drive and confidence sharper than ever. He found Poirot and Hastings in the study, where the detective stood gazing thoughtfully at the fireplace, the same hearth that had consumed the secrets of Sir Reginald's final hours. "Good news, gentlemen," Cromwell announced, his tone brisk. "We've made progress at last. Dacre's handwriting matches the forged signatures on those cheques. I've already telegraphed the handwriting expert in London. Confirmation should come within the hour." Hastings looked up in surprise. "You mean Dacre was defrauding Sir Reginald?" "Precisely," Graves said with a grim satisfaction. "He had motive enough to kill the man, discovered, blackmailed and cornered. Then he staged the suicide to cover his tracks, all neat and tidy." Poirot said nothing at first. He reached out with his gloved hand and brushed the edge of the mantelpiece, eyes lowered in thought. "Neat and tidy, yes," he murmured. "That is what troubles me, Inspector. Real life, she is seldom so tidy." Graves gave a short laugh. "You overcomplicate things, Poirot. The man's guilty. We've got evidence, opportunity and motive. I've already sent a constable to keep him under watch." Poirot turned then, and the faint smile that touched his lips did not reach his eyes. "Ah, my dear Inspector, beware of the case that arranges itself too conveniently. It is like a gift wrapped by unseen hands. You admire the ribbon, but you do not ask who tied it." Graves waved a hand dismissively. "We'll see what the handwriting says. In the meantime, I'm treating this as solved." He left the room with the brisk self-assurance of a man who believed the world was simple, and Poirot watched him go, fingers steepled. When they were alone, Hastings frowned. "He does have a point, Poirot. If Dacre was behind those payments, it fits neatly, doesn't it?" "Neatly, yes," Poirot replied softly. "Too neatly. And that, mon ami, is the problem. Consider, Dacre's motive is sound, yet his behaviour since the crime has not been that of a man in triumph or despair. He fears discovery, yes, but not this discovery. He fears something quite different." Hastings leaned forward. "Then you think someone's framing him?" Poirot inclined his head. "I think someone very clever has built a small stage and asked poor Monsieur Dacre to play the villain." The rest of the morning unfolded with deceptive calm. Dacre was brought into the drawing-room under guard, pale but composed. The others were gathered nearby, Lady Whitcomb trembling with exhaustion, Colonel Grant glowering in silent disapproval, and Clara seated near the window, her gaze fixed on the garden beyond. Graves stood before them, a folded telegram in his hand. "Confirmation from London," he declared triumphantly. "The handwriting on the cheques is a match for Lionel Dacre's. We'll be taking him into custody." A murmur rippled through the room. Dacre's voice, when it came, was low but steady. "I won't deny the handwriting," he said. "But those cheques were written under Sir Reginald's instruction. He wanted to conceal certain financial dealings, something to do with the company he'd ruined years ago. I was following orders." "Lies," Graves snapped. "You were embezzling from him, and when he found out, you silenced him." Dacre's composure cracked for the first time. "No, I didn't kill him. I swear it. I burned letters. Yes, but at his request. He was frightened of something, someone from his past." "Enough," Graves cut him off. "Save it for the magistrate." As Dacre was led away, Clara rose abruptly. "Inspector, please, you must listen. He didn't kill my father. I know he didn't." Graves frowned. "And how could you possibly know that, miss?" Her voice trembled. "Because I saw him leave the study last night. Alive." The room went still. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "You saw your father alive after Monsieur Dacre left?" Clara nodded, pale as paper. "Yes, it was just after 11. I couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs. The door to the study was ajar. Father was sitting at his desk, writing. He didn't see me." "Why did you not say this before?" Poirot asked quietly. I was frightened. I thought if I told anyone, they'd think I'd gone down there myself. And I did, later, when I heard a sound. But the door was locked by then." Graves turned on her sharply. "Why didn't you tell us that from the start?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Because of the will. I thought you'd think I had something to gain." Poirot moved closer, his tone soft but intent. "And do you?" She shook her head. "I don't even know what was in it. He never told me." Graves muttered something under his breath and stalked from the room, clearly irritated. Hastings followed to calm him, but Poirot remained still, his gaze never leaving the young woman's face. When the door closed, he spoke again, very quietly. "Mademoiselle, you say you saw your father alive at 11. Tell me, did he look at peace?" She hesitated. No, he looked afraid. Poirot bowed his head slightly, his suspicions knitting tighter. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have told me more than you know." By afternoon, the manor had become a hive of restless movement. Police entering and leaving, trunks of papers searched, and whispers spreading like wind through corridors. The household had the air of people pretending to resume normal life, though every footstep sounded like a question left unanswered. Poirot and Hastings walked the length of the hall as the rain began again, soft and steady. Hastings spoke first. "So, Graves has his man. He'll have Dacre locked up by nightfall." "Yes," Poirot said absently. "And yet, Hastings, do you recall the faint smell of gun oil on the revolver? It was fresh, applied within a day. Dacre does not own such oil. He prefers ink to machinery. But Colonel Grant, he keeps his weapons polished with military precision." Hastings blinked. "You think the Colonel could be involved?" Poirot shook his head slowly. "No. He is a proud man, but not a murderer. His anger burns quick, not cold. Still, the oil, someone used it. Someone who wished to make the gun appear recently maintained. Why? Unless to suggest the owner's hand." As he spoke, a distant commotion echoed from outside, a carriage pulling up in haste. Poirot turned to see Graves re-entering, his face flushed with triumph. "You'll want to hear this, Poirot," he said. "We've just had word from London. Dacre confessed." Poirot's brow rose. "Confessed?" Graves nodded, beaming. "Admitted to forging the cheques and killing Sir Reginald when the truth came out. Said it was self-defence. Claimed the old man went for the gun first. That's all we need." Poirot's expression did not change, but something in his eyes went still and cold. "And you believe this confession?" "It's signed and witnessed. Good enough for me." Poirot's gaze drifted toward the window. "Then perhaps, Inspector, you will permit me one last indulgence, a small visit to the study before you go." Graves shrugged. "If it pleases you. But I warn you, you won't find anything that changes this." When they left, Poirot stood alone in the study once more. The room was silent, the air faintly perfumed with violets. He ran a gloved finger along the edge of the desk, pausing where the missing glass ring had once been. His eyes followed the faint trail of scuff marks on the floor, leading not toward the door but to the fireplace. Kneeling, he touched the hearthstone. It was loose. With delicate care, he lifted it, and beneath lay a small envelope, scorched at the edges but intact. Inside was a single sheet of paper written in Sir Reginald's bold hand. "If anything should happen to me, the truth lies not with my enemies, but with those who call themselves my own." Poirot folded it slowly, a shadow crossing his face. "Ah," he whispered, "then we have indeed found a confession, but not the one we needed." Outside, the carriage wheels rattled away toward the village, carrying Lionel Dacre to his supposed fate. And within Briarwood Manor, the true hand behind the crime remained still, silent and unseen, waiting patiently for the game to continue. The rain returned that night, soft and unbroken, like the steady ticking of an unseen clock. Briarwood Manor lay hushed beneath it, its windows dark but for the faint light in Poirot's room. The detective sat at his small writing desk, the envelope from beneath the hearthstone open before him. The paper inside was yellowed, scorched at its edges, the ink faint but legible. He read it again and again, tracing each word as though it might whisper a secret between its lines. "If anything should happen to me, the truth lies not with my enemies, but with those who call themselves my own." He folded it carefully and placed it beside his notebook. The words haunted him, not for their warning but for their precision. Sir Reginald had not written in panic. He had written with deliberation, a man who knew his death was coming, but not from outside his walls. When dawn came, Poirot was already dressed, immaculate as ever. He joined Hastings at breakfast, though his cup remained untouched. "You did not sleep?" Hastings asked, noting the faint shadows beneath his friend's eyes. Poirot smiled faintly. "I rested the little grey cells instead of the body. They, mon ami, are more restless than I." "What troubles them?" Poirot leaned back, fingers interlaced. This phrase, Hastings, those who call themselves my own. It is not accusation alone, it is irony. There is something in it that points to affection betrayed, not enmity. The hand that killed Sir Reginald was not that of a stranger, it was one who believed themselves justified. Before Hastings could respond, a knock sounded at the door. It was Lady Whitcomb, pale and drawn, a shawl wrapped tight about her shoulders. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "I must speak with you, alone." Hastings rose at once and excused himself. Lady Whitcomb sank into a chair, her gloved hands trembling. "They say Lionel Dacre confessed," she began, her voice unsteady. "But you don't believe it, do you?" Poirot studied her quietly. "Non, madame. His confession is a shield, not a sword. He protects someone, or fears something." Her eyes flickered. "Then you must understand that my husband was not the man everyone believes. There are things from his past you cannot know, things that, if revealed, would ruin us all." "Ruin, madame?" Poirot's tone was soft. "Or justice long overdue?" She flinched. He was not cruel, but he was secretive. Years ago, when he was younger, he made enemies in business. There was a man, an associate, accused of embezzlement. My husband testified against him. The man went to prison. He had a daughter, perhaps not much older than Clara is now. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And what was the name of this man?" Her lips parted, then hesitated. "Hale. Edward Hale. He took his own life before his sentence was complete." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "And his daughter?" "I don't know," she whispered. "We never spoke of it again. Reginald refused. He said the matter was finished." Poirot rose, bowing his head politely. "Madame, you have been most courageous. I thank you. You may go now, and rest. I think soon this house will breathe again." When she had gone, Hastings returned, his expression puzzled. "What was all that about, Poirot?" "An old wound, mon ami, one that still bleeds beneath the surface. This Edward Hale, he is the shadow in our present day, the man whose ruin Sir Reginald profited from, and perhaps the one whose child now seeks balance." Hastings frowned. "But how could that tie into what's happening now?" Poirot tapped his finger against the desk. "Ah, Hastings, do you not see? The past she is never content to stay. Buried. Consider. The forgeries, the false company payments. They began roughly 3 years ago, the same year the payments from Whitcomb Investments ceased to exist. Someone was paying Sir Reginald, not to keep silent, but to atone. Perhaps for what was done to this Edward Hale." Later that morning, Poirot requested to see Clara again. She met him in the small morning room, her hair loose about her shoulders, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. "You wish to speak with me?" she asked warily. "Yes, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently. "You told me last night that your father seemed afraid. Do you know why?" She looked down at her hands. "He received a letter the day before he died. I saw it on his desk. He looked as though he'd seen a ghost. Do you recall what it said?" "No. He burned it almost immediately, but I remember the envelope. It had no seal, only his name, written in a woman's hand." Poirot's gaze did not waver. "A woman's hand," he repeated softly. "Tell me, mademoiselle, do you know if your father had ever met a Miss Hale?" She froze. "Hale? Yes. Edward Hale? He was once your father's business partner?" Her eyes widened with something between surprise and confusion. "I've heard the name. Years ago my father mentioned him. He said the man had betrayed him, but that's all I know." Poirot's tone deepened. "Mademoiselle, are you certain?" She hesitated. Yes. At least I think so." Poirot's eyes softened. "Then permit me one last question. The night of your father's death, did you see anyone else near the study?" She hesitated again, too long. "No one," she said finally. "Ah," Poirot murmured. "Then it is very curious indeed that the maid, when questioned, remembers hearing your voice in the corridor just after midnight. You told her you were going to fetch a shawl, but the shawl, I find, was already in your room." Clara's breath caught. You think I—" Poirot raised a hand. "Non, mademoiselle. I think you went to meet someone you wish to protect, someone whose name you dare not speak. Perhaps the same person who sent that note to me. Ask the daughter. You see, it was not written to accuse you, but to warn you." Her composure faltered, tears trembling in her eyes. I can't tell you." Poirot's voice grew softer still. "You can, and you must. Because unless you do, an innocent man will hang for your silence." She shook her head, voice breaking. "If I tell you, it will destroy her." "Her?" Poirot repeated quietly. Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, realizing too late what she had said. Poirot leaned forward, eyes glinting. "Her, mademoiselle. Then the hand that killed your father was not that of Lionel Dacre, nor of yourself. It was someone else, someone older, perhaps, someone who believed she was protecting you." Clara's silence was answer enough. Poirot exhaled softly. "So, the circle closes. The motive was not hatred, it was guilt. The crime, not born of greed, but of penance, and the past she has come to collect her debt." As Clara fled the room in tears, Hastings stepped forward from the doorway, his expression grave. "You think Lady Whitcomb?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, Hastings. I think Lady Whitcomb once knew the daughter of Edward Hale, and when Sir Reginald recognised her, when he saw the ghost of a ruined man's child beneath her genteel mask, he realised the truth he had tried to bury had come home. She killed not for revenge, but for fear that the sins of the past would fall upon her daughter. The irony, mon ami. It is poetic, is it not? The wife of the man who ruined Hale, and Hale's daughter, one and the same." Hastings stared at him in stunned silence. "You mean Lady Whitcomb is—" "Yes," Poirot said quietly. "She is the daughter of Edward Hale, and the past, Hastings, has been whispering her name all along." Outside, the rain fell harder, streaming down the windows like the blurred ink of a letter too long unread. Somewhere in the echo of that storm the ghosts of Briarwood stirred, and the truth at last began to breathe. The house had grown heavy with silence. Even the rain seemed to hush as if listening. Poirot stood before the parlour window, his reflection faintly ghosted in the glass. Outside, the mist drifted over the gardens like the memory of smoke. Hastings watched him from the doorway, uncertain whether to speak. Poirot's stillness was deceptive. It was the pause of a mind tightening the final knot. "Tell me, Hastings," he said at last, turning with that measured calm that always preceded revelation. "What is it that hides best in plain sight?" Hastings blinked. "You mean evidence?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Non. Guilt, mon ami. It does not flee into the shadows. It dresses itself in grief, in righteousness, even in love. And now I must draw it out into the light. To do that, I shall use a little theatre." Hastings frowned. "Theatre?" Poirot adjusted his tie with precise fingers. "Oui, it is not always logic that exposes the liar. Sometimes the truth reveals itself only when one's emotions are caught unawares. I shall invite our suspects to a little demonstration this afternoon. Tell Lady Whitcomb, Mademoiselle Clara, and Colonel Grant that I wish to reconstruct the final moments of Sir Reginald's life. Oh, and our poor Monsieur Dacre, too. He must be brought back from the custody of Inspector Graves. I have need of him one last time." By 3 o'clock the household gathered once more in the study. The air was close, the faint scent of smoke still clinging to the hearth. Lady Whitcomb sat rigidly by the window, her gloved hands clasped too tightly. Clara hovered near her mother, pale and trembling, while Colonel Grant stood by the mantel, arms crossed in defiance. Dacre had been escorted, back under guard. His face was drawn, eyes weary but alert. Poirot took his place beside the desk where Sir Reginald had been found. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began softly, "you will forgive this intrusion upon your sorrow. But to bring peace to the soul of the departed, one must first bring order to the living. I intend to do so now." Graves gave a sceptical grunt from the corner. "If you can do it without another lecture on human psychology, I'd be grateful." Poirot's moustache twitched in amusement. "Ah, but psychology's the key, my good inspector. You see, when the mind tells one story and the heart another, the body betrays the truth. It is most obliging in that way." He turned to the group. "I ask each of you to play a small part in our reconstruction. Nothing more." He began by positioning Dacre beside the desk. "You, Monsieur Dacre, were accused of murder. Let us see how such an accusation might appear if you were truly guilty." Dacre stiffened but obeyed. Poirot placed a cold, gleaming replica of a revolver upon the desk, borrowed from the Colonel's case, Hastings knew. The sight of it drew a ripple of unease through the room. "Now," Poirot continued, "imagine it is the night of the crime. Sir Reginald sits here, Writing his final letter. You stand behind him. He discovers your secret, threatens exposure. What do you do? I tell him he was wrong, Dacre said quietly. Indeed, Poirot murmured. And if he persisted? Dacre hesitated, then clenched his jaw. I'd walk away. Poirot leaned in slightly. And yet you did not walk far, did you, Monsieur Dacre? The study door was found locked from within. You, perhaps, used the key to stage the suicide, yes? Dacre's eyes flashed with sudden anger. That's a lie. Ah, Poirot said softly, raising a finger. And yet when you speak it, you glance. There. His gaze followed Dacre's involuntary flicker toward Lady Whitcomb. Curious. One always looks to the person one fears will be betrayed by the truth. A low murmur ran through the room. Lady Whitcomb's lips parted, but no words came. Poirot straightened, turning to the Colonel. And you, Colonel Grant, stand here, if you please. You lent Sir Reginald your revolver. Perhaps you were in the study the day before, showing him its workings. The Colonel's face hardened. I told you, I gave it to him for protection. Yes, yes, Poirot said smoothly, but you did not tell me that he threatened to withdraw the funds that supported your regiment's charity. I discovered the correspondence in his desk. A noble cause, Colonel, but desperation is a treacherous companion. Grant's shoulders stiffened. If you're implying... Poirot waved a hand. No, I imply nothing. I merely observe. You too have something to lose, as does everyone in this house. He turned now to Lady Whitcomb, his tone shifting to one of deep gentleness. Madame, if you would stand where your husband sat, just there. She rose slowly, her movements graceful but strained, and lowered herself into the chair. Poirot gestured for Hastings to dim the lamp slightly, and at once the room took on the sombre hue of that fatal night. Now, Poirot said softly, you are Sir Reginald. You have written your last words, perhaps not knowing they are such. The house is silent. Outside the rain falls. You hear a knock upon the door, soft, hesitant. Who is it, madame? She hesitated. I don't know. But you do, Poirot said, his voice barely above a whisper. You know the sound well. It is one you have heard every evening for 20 years. The hand that knocks is your own. Lady Whitcomb's breath caught, the faintest tremor in her voice. You think I killed my husband? Poirot didn't answer. Instead, he moved toward the fireplace where the faint traces of ash still clung to the grate. When I examined these ashes, madame, I found fragments of 2 letters, one written in Sir Reginald's hand, the other in yours. He discovered the truth, did he not? That the name you bore was not Whitcomb, but Hale. The colour drained from her face. Poirot's tone remained gentle, almost sorrowful. He recognized you at last after all these years, the daughter of the man he ruined. You married him not out of love, but out of vengeance disguised as devotion. And when he learned that your marriage was built on deceit, you feared exposure, feared for your daughter most of all. So you silenced him. One bullet, a locked room, the perfect illusion of despair. Clara gasped, turning toward her mother in disbelief. Mother, no, please tell him he's wrong. But Lady Whitcomb's hands were trembling violently. Poirot stepped closer, placing the cold revolver on the desk before her. There is a way to know the truth, he said softly. A man who fires in anger never forgets the feel of the weapon. Pick it up, madame. Show me how he died. She stared at it for a long moment, eyes fixed as if transfixed by a terrible memory. Her fingers reached, hesitated, and then closed around the grip. But instead of mimicking the motion, she turned the barrel toward herself. No! Clara cried out, rushing forward, but Poirot was quicker. He caught Lady Whitcomb's wrist with surprising strength and gently pried the weapon free. It clattered harmlessly onto the desk. For a moment, the only sound was her ragged breathing. Then she whispered, brokenly, I never meant to kill him. I only wanted him to understand, to know what he'd done to my father. He laughed. He said justice was a fool's dream. I wanted to frighten him, that was all. But the gun, it went off. Poirot bowed his head. The heart, madame, it does not always wait for the mind's permission, and so tragedy repeats itself. Inspector Graves stepped forward, expression grim but not unkind. I'll have to take her in, Poirot. The detective nodded slowly. Yes, Inspector, but treat her with gentleness. She has punished herself far longer than the law ever could. As Lady Whitcomb was led from the room, Clara followed silently, tears streaking her pale face. Poirot remained still, his gaze fixed on the empty chair where Sir Reginald had once sat. Hastings spoke softly beside him. "You used that revolver as a test." Poirot smiled faintly, but his eyes were far away. "Non, Hastings. I used her conscience. The little grey cells may solve the puzzle, but it is always the heart that confesses." Outside, the rain began again, light, steady, and endless, washing the gardens of Briarwood clean. Yet inside, the echoes of the past lingered, soft as the breath of ghosts. The following morning broke grey and windless, the air thick with a strange, uneasy quiet. The servants moved through Briarwood Manor like shadows, speaking in hushed tones, as though the house itself still trembled from what had been revealed the night before. Poirot, however, was already awake, seated neatly at the writing desk in his guest room, reviewing his notes by the dull light of the overcast sky. There was satisfaction in his precision, but no triumph. Justice to him was never an act of victory, only restoration. Yet as he turned over the small envelope found beneath the hearthstone, his fingers paused. The paper felt wrong somehow, too light, too thin. He unfolded it carefully and his sharp eyes narrowed. The handwriting, once steady, now bore faint smudges where there had been none before. The signature, R. Whitcomb, was gone. He stared for a long moment, the faintest crease appearing between his brows. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "the truth begins to vanish even before it is fully told." At that moment, a knock sounded. Hastings entered, hair dishevelled, jacket hastily buttoned. "Poirot, have you heard? Inspector Graves is in an uproar. Someone's broken into the constabulary. Dacre's cell, emptied. He's escaped." Poirot rose at once, eyes gleaming with sudden alertness. "Escaped? Or permitted to vanish, Hastings? One must not leap to conclusions. Tell me, when did this occur?" "Some time before dawn. The constable on duty claims he was drugged. Coffee laced with laudanum. Dacre was gone by the time they found him." Poirot's gaze drifted to the empty spot where the letter's signature should have been. "Ah, Hastings. The plot. She thickens like the English fog. Someone wishes very much for the wrong story to survive." By the time they arrived downstairs, Inspector Graves was already there, pacing the drawing-room with fury. "The devil's made a fool of us all. I'll have the roads blocked within the hour. He won't get far." Poirot's voice was calm. "And yet, if he wished only to flee, why erase the signature from Sir Reginald's letter? No, my friend, this is not flight. It is orchestration." Graves turned sharply. "You mean someone helped him?" Poirot's gaze flicked to the window where the curtains swayed gently though no wind entered. "Helped or used him. There is a difference, Inspector. One implies loyalty, the other manipulation." The door opened suddenly. Clara stood there pale as paper, her hands clasped tightly before her. "Is it true? Lionel's escaped?" "Yes, mademoiselle," Poirot said softly. "He is free. But I do not think he runs from justice. He runs from fear." She blinked, confused. "Fear of what?" "Of what may yet be revealed," Poirot murmured. She hesitated, glancing toward her mother's empty chair near the window. "Mother, she asked for me before she was taken away. She said, 'They won't stop, even now.' I didn't understand what she meant." Poirot's head lifted. "They, a plural word, note well. Not one enemy, but several. Perhaps not even human enemies, but hands of the same will. Tell me, did your mother receive visitors before your father's death?" Clara frowned, thinking. "Only a letter. No one came here. At least, not that I saw." Poirot murmured, tapping his chin. "Letters again. Always the letters. First the payments, then the confession, now this mysterious missive. Words that travel farther than footsteps. Yes, it is becoming clear." Before he could continue, Graves' voice barked from behind. "You're chasing ghosts, Poirot. Dacre killed Whitcomb. His confession was coerced," Poirot interrupted mildly. "A mind under duress tells the story others wish to hear. But I tell you, Inspector, there is someone else. Someone who knew Lady Whitcomb's secret and feared its exposure would reach further still." Graves scowled. "You're suggesting a conspiracy now?" Poirot smiled thinly. "A family is always a conspiracy, my good Inspector. The question is, what are they conspiring to protect?" At that moment a cry came from the hall. The maid burst in, her apron streaked with soot. "Sir, the study! It's burning!" They rushed through the corridor, the acrid smell of smoke already thick in the air. The door to the late Sir Reginald's study was ajar, and within, a small blaze licked at the edges of the desk, devouring papers and ash alike. Poirot seized a nearby throw and smothered the flames with swift precision, Hastings aiding him until only wisps of grey smoke remained. When the air cleared, Poirot knelt among the charred remnants. His gloved fingers sifted carefully through the soot. A few fragments of letters, warped by heat, lay in ruin. Every record, every note connected to Whitcomb Investments, the payments, the correspondence, gone. Only a few half-burnt edges remained. The ink dissolved into unreadable streaks. Graves stared in disbelief. Well, that's that. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were after. Poirot nodded grimly. Yes, and they did not act from afar. No intruder could have entered unseen. This was someone inside the house. Clara, trembling near the doorway, whispered, "But who would do such a thing? There's no one left." Poirot turned his gaze toward her. "Ah, mademoiselle, in this house there are always two left. The guilty and the frightened. Often they are the same." He rose, brushing ash from his sleeve, and crossed to the window. The latch hung crooked, forced from within. "Look, Hastings. The lock has been wrenched recently. Someone left by this route not long ago." Hastings frowned. "But that's impossible. We've been here all morning." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Not all of us, mon ami. Where is Colonel Grant?" They found him minutes later in the conservatory, standing stiffly among the orchids, his cane clutched too tightly. His face bore a pale sheen of sweat. "What's the meaning of this commotion?" he demanded. Poirot regarded him coolly. "A fire, Colonel. Very unfortunate. The last remnants of Sir Reginald's papers destroyed. Such timing is remarkable, is it not?" Grant's mouth thinned. "Are you accusing me again?" "I accuse only circumstance," Poirot replied mildly. "And yet, I wonder, why is your sleeve marked with ash when the fire was contained before you arrived?" The Colonel's jaw clenched, but before he could respond, Graves stepped forward. "By heaven, if you've tampered with—" "I've done nothing," Grant barked, his composure cracking. "Those papers were poison. Best they were burned. Whitcomb's lies should have died with him." Poirot's tone softened, dangerously quiet. "Ah, so you did know what they contained. Then it is true. You and Sir Reginald quarrelled not only about money, but about honour. And yet, it was not your honour at stake, was it, Colonel?" The older man's eyes flickered with panic. "You have no proof." "No," Poirot agreed, "because you have just destroyed it." Grant stared at him, breathing heavily, then turned sharply and stormed out, his cane striking the floor like gunfire. As the sound faded, Poirot sighed, his gaze falling to the scorched desk once more. "It is as I feared, Hastings. The evidence that would have spoken for the dead has been silenced. Someone fears not prison, but revelation." Hastings rubbed his forehead. "So what do we do now?" Poirot looked toward the grey light filtering through the smoke-stained window. "Now, mon ami, we listen. When truth is burned, it speaks in whispers, and the ashes, they remember who touched them last." He bent, retrieving one small half-charred scrap of paper the fire had spared. Barely visible, a few words trembled in faded ink. The account held in her maiden name. Poirot's lips tightened into a thin line. "The game," he murmured, "is not over. It has merely changed its board." And somewhere beyond the fog-shrouded gardens, a figure moved unseen, through the rain, carrying what remained of the past, and perhaps the final key to the truth that Briarwood still refused to release. The storm broke fully that night, slashing the manor with cold rain and rattling its windows like restless fingers. The flames in the hearth hissed with each gust, and the house creaked as if straining under the weight of its own secrets. Poirot sat in the library, his notes spread neatly before him, the single charred scrap of paper resting at the centre like the heart of a puzzle not yet solved. Hastings had gone to fetch tea, but Poirot barely noticed. His mind was circling a new unease, one that had no place in logic but whispered nonetheless. He had long learned to trust such whispers. Somewhere beyond the closed doors of Briarwood Manor something still moved in the dark. Not guilt, not fear, but intent. When Hastings returned, His hands trembled slightly, the teapot clinking against its tray. The power's flickering again. It's ghastly outside, like the whole world's gone black. Poirot smiled faintly. It is not the world that has gone black, Hastings. It is only that the light has moved elsewhere. Before Hastings could ask what he meant, a sound cut through the house, a sharp, echoing crash from the far end of the hall. Then silence. They exchanged a glance and moved quickly toward it. The corridor was long and dim, shadows pooling where the lamps had guttered. The smell of rain mingled with something faintly metallic. As they turned the corner near the study, Hastings froze. The door stood ajar again, its frame splintered, its lock broken anew. Poirot stepped forward first, eyes narrowed, movements controlled. The air inside was cold. A single candle flickered on the desk, casting a trembling light over the chaos within. Books lay scattered, drawers upturned, the once orderly desk stripped bare. But what drew Poirot's gaze was the shape on the floor. Colonel Grant lay sprawled near the window, his cane fallen beside him, his face turned to the ceiling. A thin line of blood ran from his temple. "Good Lord," Hastings breathed. He's dead." Poirot knelt beside the body, fingers gentle as he examined the wound. "Not long," he murmured. "Less than half an hour, the blood still glistens." He turned the colonel's hand, palm up. "Ah, you see, Hastings? Burn marks. He tried to hold something burning, paper perhaps, the remnants of what he failed to destroy this morning." Hastings swallowed hard. Then he was killed for it? Poirot rose slowly, his expression unreadable. Or because he refused to destroy it all? He turned toward the desk. "Look, the window. Open again. Whoever killed him entered that way, though the storm would make such an approach perilous. A desperate act, Hastings, by someone who could no longer afford patience." Graves burst into the room moments later, rain slicking his coat. "I heard the noise from outside. What the devil's happened here?" Poirot gestured toward the body. "Colonel Grant, Inspector. He has been silenced." Graves's face hardened. "Silenced? By whom? Dacre's escaped. This must be his work." Poirot shook his head. No, my dear Graves. Dacre is no longer part of this game. He is the pawn that has already been sacrificed. The killer still here, moving among us, eliminates not witnesses, but loose ends." Graves frowned. "Loose ends?" "Oui," Poirot said softly. "Those who knew that the account, held in her maiden name, as the paper said, was not Lady Whitcomb's at all. It was a fund belonging to another, one hidden under that name to protect its true owner. And now, that owner removes all who could expose them." A flash of lightning illuminated the window, followed by thunder that rattled the panes. Hastings turned to the inspector. Who else in this house could have known about the account? Graves hesitated. Just the daughter, and Dacre, perhaps. Poirot looked sharply toward the door. Then we must find Mademoiselle Clara at once. They searched swiftly. The upper halls echoed with their footsteps, doors flung open one after another. Clara's room stood empty, her wardrobe stripped of her travelling cloak. A candle had burned low beside the mirror, its wax pooling on a folded note. Poirot took it up carefully, reading in silence. "Gone to make amends," he murmured. "Ah, the tragedy of the English conscience. It seeks redemption at the moment most ill-suited for it." "What does it mean?" Hastings asked. Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet urgency. "It means she goes to meet someone, mon ami, and not to seek forgiveness, but to end the matter entirely." They hurried down to the courtyard, where the rain fell in relentless sheets. The path to the stables was a blur of puddles and mud, the wind howling through the yews. Graves called out orders to the constables, but Poirot moved with singular focus, lantern in hand. He stopped near the open carriage shed, where the faint glimmer of movement caught his eye. Clara stood within, her cloak soaked through, her hair clinging to her face. Opposite her, a man emerged from the shadows, Lionel Dacre. His face was hollow, his eyes fevered with desperation. "I told you not to come," he was saying, his voice low, shaking. "They'll be watching the roads." "You shouldn't have returned," she answered, voice breaking. "You're only making it worse." "I had no choice," Dacre said. "Your mother, she told me everything before she—" His words faltered. "She wanted me to protect you, but now it's all ruined. The colonel found out. He threatened to go to the police. I had to—" A flash of lightning revealed something glinting in his hand, a revolver, half raised. Poirot's voice cut through the storm. "Monsieur Dacre!" Both turned sharply. Clara stepped back, startled, but Dacre's eyes filled, not with rage, but fear. "Stay where you are, Poirot. You don't understand." "Au contraire," Poirot said evenly, stepping forward. "I understand very well. You did not kill Sir Reginald, but you did kill Colonel Grant tonight, did you not?" Dacre's hand trembled. "He would have ruined her. I couldn't let him." Poirot's tone softened. "And so, in your devotion, you have condemned yourself and her. It is always the same pattern. To save what one loves, one destroys it." Dacre's eyes darted toward Clara, filled with anguish. "I never meant—" A gunshot cracked through the air. Dacre staggered, dropping the weapon, and fell against the wall of the shed. Graves lowered his revolver slowly, smoke curling from its barrel. "He aimed at her," the inspector said hoarsely. Poirot knelt beside the fallen man, feeling for a pulse that was already gone. The lantern light trembled over Dacre's still face. "No," Poirot whispered. "He aimed at himself." For a moment the rain drowned all sound. Clara stood motionless, eyes fixed on the lifeless body. Poirot rose slowly, his expression unreadable. "It is over," he said, though his tone carried no relief. "But the storm, she is not yet past. You see, Hastings, every tragedy leaves its echo, and this one has not yet stopped ringing." Clara turned to him suddenly, voice trembling. "He wasn't protecting me, was he? He was protecting her secret, the account, my mother's name." Poirot nodded. "Yes, mademoiselle. He knew it would damn her memory, and perhaps he thought by ending his life he could silence it forever." The thunder rolled again, distant but unrelenting. Poirot looked out toward the darkened road leading away from Briarwood Manor. "Yet," he murmured, "there is one thing he did not destroy. One piece of the past still remains unclaimed." He drew from his pocket the half-charred scrap, the words almost erased by rain. "The account held in her maiden name," he repeated softly. "Tell me, Hastings, what maiden name does not belong to the living but to the dead?" And in that instant he understood. The twist, silent and chilling, unfurled in his mind like smoke. Someone still lived who should not. Someone who had never been named. And Briarwood Manor, for all its silence, was not yet finished speaking. The rain had thinned to a cold drizzle by dawn, leaving Briarwood Manor cloaked in a damp grey stillness. The constables moved quietly across the grounds, their boots sinking into wet gravel, while inside the echo of last night's violence lingered in every corridor. Poirot sat in the drawing-room beside the dying fire, his hands folded neatly, his gaze fixed on the darkened window. Hastings paced before him, agitated. "I can't make sense of it," he said. "First Sir Reginald, then the Colonel, and now Dacre dead too. Every time we think we've found the end of it, something else unravels." Poirot's eyes flickered toward him, thoughtful. "Non, mon ami. It does not unravel. It merely tightens. Each thread, though chaotic, winds toward a single knot. We have only to see where the strands meet." "But how can they?" Hastings protested. "The Colonel burned the papers," Lady Whitcomb confessed. "Dacre's gone and Clara's left with nothing but grief. What more could there be?" Poirot leaned back in his chair, the faintest smile curving his lips. "What more, indeed? That is precisely what troubles me. There is something missing. Not a person, not a motive, but a purpose. Why all this destruction? Why the fire, the forgery, the false confessions? A murderer kills to silence, yes. But these, they were silencing the past." Hastings frowned. "You think someone else is still out there?" "I think, Hastings," Poirot said softly, "that someone has been out there all along. Someone who has watched, guided, even shaped every turn of this tragedy, and whose name we have yet to speak." The door creaked open, and Inspector Graves entered, weary but alert. "We've searched the estate. Nothing unusual. The stable doors were locked after Dacre's demise. No tracks leading out, no footprints that don't belong." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "Then the storm has washed away our evidence. Convenient, n'est-ce pas?" Graves ignored the jab and dropped a file onto the table. "We did find something in the Colonel's pocket, though. This." He slid a damp envelope forward. Unsent letter, addressed to Scotland Yard. He'd written part of it before he died. Poirot opened it delicately. The ink had bled from the rain, but enough words remained to read. Cannot stay silent. The girl must never know. The one who arranged the accounts, she was not his wife. Poirot's brow furrowed. She was not his wife, he repeated slowly. Then, very softly, Mais bien sûr, of course. Hastings looked baffled. Not his wife? But Lady Whitcomb was his wife in name, yes, Poirot interrupted. But in law? Perhaps not. It would explain much, would it not? A marriage unregistered, a fortune concealed, an inheritance in question. And when the truth began to surface, murder followed. Graves scowled. You're suggesting the old man's own wife wasn't legally his? That's absurd. Poirot rose, pacing now, his energy suddenly sharp. Not absurd, Inspector, merely English. It happens often enough. A false marriage, a new identity, a past one buries, but to bury it, one must first create a grave. He stopped by the mantel, his gaze falling on the small portrait that hung above it, a painting of Lady Whitcomb in her youth, her expression serene, her hand resting lightly on a table beside a small vase of violets. Poirot studied it for a long time, his eyes narrowing. Hastings, do you recall what Lady Whitcomb said the night of her confession? About her father? Yes, that he took his life before his sentence was complete. Edward Hale. Poirot's voice dropped to a murmur. But if he died before the end of his sentence, who signed the confession of death? Who registered the estate? I imagine the prison authorities did, Hastings said uncertainly. Poirot's smile deepened, but there was no warmth in it. Ah, but that is where we err. No record of such death exists, Hastings. I checked the files this morning. Edward Hale never died. He disappeared. Graves blinked. You mean to say, I mean, Poirot said quietly, that the past we thought buried at Briarwood still walks among us. There was a long silence. The clock ticked faintly. Then, as if on cue, the butler entered carrying a tray. Tea, sir, he said politely, setting it down. His tone was impeccable, but his hands shook slightly as he poured. Poirot's eyes drifted to the man's wrists, scarred faintly at the edges of his cuffs. He spoke lightly. You have been with the Whitcombes long, Monsieur Harcourt? Nearly 15 years, sir, the butler replied, avoiding his gaze. Ah, then you knew Lady Whitcomb before her marriage. A pause, almost imperceptible. I did, sir. I served her family when she was still Miss Hale. Indeed. Poirot's tone was conversational, but something in it changed. Quiet. Deliberate. And tell me, did you also serve her father? The butler hesitated. I may have met him, once or twice. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, mais non, monsieur. You did not meet him. You were him. The tray rattled in Harcourt's trembling hands. Hastings stared in disbelief. You can't be serious, Poirot. Quite serious, Poirot said softly. The scars upon his wrists, the same kind found on men who once wore irons. The precise knowledge of Lady Whitcomb's affairs, and most telling of all, the way he flinched when I spoke of her confession, because he knew it condemned him as much as her. Harcourt's face had drained of colour. You don't understand, he said hoarsely. I did it for her, for Clara. She was all that was left of the name I destroyed. Poirot's voice softened, almost compassionate. You created a new life, Monsieur Hale, and hid it behind a servant's face. But when Sir Reginald learned who his wife truly was, he threatened to expose you both. So Lady Whitcomb shot him, and you, to protect her, began the fire that would erase the truth. And when the Colonel found the missing records last night, Harcourt's voice broke. I begged him to stay silent. He wouldn't. He said the world must know what I'd done. I only meant to frighten him. God forgive me. I didn't mean to. Graves stepped forward, hand on his revolver. That's enough. You'll come quietly now. But Harcourt shook his head slowly. No, I've lived too long in borrowed years. He glanced once toward the window where the morning light had begun, to pale the sky, and then, with a small broken sound, turned and fled through the servants' door. After him, Graves shouted, racing after him with his men. Poirot did not move. He remained by the mantel, eyes still fixed on the portrait above. Hastings turned to him, breathless. You knew, he said. You knew all along. Poirot's voice was very quiet. Non, Hastings. I merely suspected. It was the violets that told me." "The violets?" "Yes." Poirot's gaze lingered on the painted flowers. Lady Whitcomb said her husband detested flowers, yet there were always fresh violets in his study. They were not his, they were hers, and she placed them there each day, not from affection, but from memory. Violets were the emblem of her father's trial, the symbol pinned to his lapel when he was sentenced. She could never forget them, nor forgive what they represented. He looked toward the door, where the echoes of pursuit were fading down the hall. The pattern, you see, was never of murder, but of inheritance, of guilt handed down like blood. Every act, every lie, every flame that burned here at Briarwood was born of one man's need to rewrite his own sin. Hastings sank into a chair, shaking his head. "So it all comes back to him." "Always," Poirot murmured. "In every crime there is one constant, the heart that beats for redemption." Outside, the first clear light of morning broke through the clouds, casting pale gold over the soaked gardens. Somewhere beyond, a shout carried faintly on the wind, then faded into silence. Poirot turned from the window, the faintest shadow crossing his face. "The pattern is clear now," he said softly. "But alas, Hastings, clarity often comes too late." The search for Harcourt lasted well into the morning. The grounds were thick with mist, the kind that hung low and made every tree seem to breathe. Constables moved in lines across the wet grass, their voices muffled by the fog. Poirot, standing at the edge of the terrace, did not join them. He simply waited, motionless, patient, as though he already knew where the chase would end. Hastings stood beside him, shifting uneasily. "They'll find him soon," Hastings said quietly. "He can't have gone far." Poirot's gaze stayed fixed on the pale horizon. "Ah, but when a man has already fled his life once, Hastings, distance no longer matters. He carries his escape inside him. It is the guilt that chases him, not the law." And as if summoned by the words, a shout rose from beyond the orchard. Then another. Within minutes, Graves appeared with 2 constables, their faces grim. Between them, drenched to the bone and limping, was Harcourt. The butler's collar was torn, his hair plastered to his temples. His eyes, though weary, were strangely calm. "I wasn't running," he said as they brought him forward. "I only wanted to see her grave before you took me away." Poirot's voice was almost gentle. "Lady Whitcomb's?" He nodded faintly. "She was my child as much as my ruin. Everything I did for her." They brought him inside, seating him before the fire where the last embers glowed dull red. Poirot dismissed everyone but Hastings and Graves. The detective stood across from Harcourt, his small frame still and composed, his gaze steady as glass. "Now, monsieur," he said softly, "we have come to the end of the circle. You have confessed your deeds, but not your reason. Why did you return to this house, to the people who could destroy you? What held you here, after so many years of deceit?" Harcourt's shoulders sagged. For a long time he said nothing. Then his voice came, low and hoarse. "You won't believe me, but it wasn't for myself. I came back because I wanted to protect her. From the truth, from what her father had done. Sir Reginald wasn't just cruel, you see. He wasn't just a man who ruined others for profit. He was something far worse." Poirot tilted his head. "Worse, monsieur?" Harcourt's eyes, dull with exhaustion, lifted toward the detective. "He knew me the moment he met me again, knew I was Hale, but he said nothing. Instead, he began to use me. He said if I wished to keep Clara and her mother safe, I'd do what he asked. For years, I obeyed. I was his servant, his confessor, his accomplice. He forced me to help him hide his own crimes." Graves scowled. "What crimes?" "Forgery, embezzlement, manipulation. He used his wife's name, her father's old accounts, to move money no one could trace. He wanted to wash his fortune clean, make it seem untainted by the scandals he created. Every month I signed the papers. Every year he threatened me anew. When he died, I thought it was over. But even death didn't free us. His secrets were buried in this house, and every one of us was chained to them." Hastings frowned. "Then Lady Whitcomb, she didn't kill him to protect you, but to stop him?" Harcourt's face tightened. "She loved him once. She hated him too. The night it happened, he told her he meant to expose everything, to ruin her name so the fortune would pass cleanly to another heir. He said Clara wasn't even his daughter." The words hung in the air like a sudden chill. Poirot's eyes flickered, but his expression remained unchanged. "Not his daughter?" Harcourt's voice cracked. "No, She was mine. There was silence. Even the fire seemed to falter. Graves took a step forward, disbelief etched into every line of his face. You're saying, Clara is your child? Yes. The word came out like a confession and a prayer. It happened long before Lady Whitcomb's marriage. We thought Edward Hale dead. She rebuilt her life, but she carried my child. Reginald knew it from the beginning. He used it to break her, to keep her docile, ashamed. When she finally found the courage to stand against him, it was already too late. Hastings stared at him, appalled. Then she married the man who destroyed you? She did what she thought would save our child, Harcourt said quietly. Reginald offered her protection, a name, respectability. He promised to keep the truth buried, but every promise he made was a chain he tightened around her neck. When she realized that, the hatred became unbearable. She thought killing him would end it. Poirot's eyes were dark with quiet comprehension. Ah, but murder, monsieur, is never the end. It is only the door to another prison. She shot him not to silence him, but to silence herself, to stop hearing the voice that reminded her of her betrayal. Harcourt lowered his head. I begged her to let me take the blame. She refused. When she confessed, I thought it was over, but then the colonel found the letters, and Dacre, poor fool, believed he could save her by burning them. Each of us thought we were protecting her, but in truth we were only feeding the fire. Poirot's gaze drifted toward the mantel where the portrait of Lady Whitcomb still hung, her serene painted smile now seeming almost cruel in its calm. So the true motive was not revenge, he said softly. It was love. Love corrupted by guilt, by fear, by too much memory. You all became prisoners of the same emotion, each bound to destroy the other for her sake. Harcourt's lips trembled. You speak as though I were still a man to pity. Poirot shook his head gently. No, monsieur. I speak as one who understands that evil rarely begins with malice. It begins with devotion misplaced. You loved too much, obeyed too long, and when at last you rebelled, it was too late to distinguish justice from destruction. The old man's eyes filled with tears. If only I'd left her behind all those years ago. Non, Poirot interrupted softly. If you had, she would have perished long before now. You gave her the only safety you knew, your silence. But now, that silence must end. Graves cleared his throat, breaking the spell. He'll answer for it before the court, Poirot. There's no more to be said. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, the law must have its due. But understand, Inspector, the truest criminal in this story is not the man who killed, but the one who made killing seem necessary. Sir Reginald built his fortune on the ruin of others. Even dead, he corrupted the living. Graves said nothing, but his eyes softened a fraction. Harcourt sat still, staring into the dying embers. After a long silence, Poirot turned to Hastings. Do you see now, mon ami? The pattern has at last revealed its heart. The murders were never about inheritance or vengeance. They were about the contagion of guilt, the way one man's sin can infect an entire house, until everyone within it is consumed. Hastings looked at him, subdued. So in the end, Poirot, it all came back to love twisted into madness. Poirot gave a small, sorrowful smile. Yes, Hastings, and it is always thus. The greatest cruelties are born not of hate, but of love unrestrained. Remember that. Outside, the fog began to lift, and a thin light crept across the rain-soaked windows. Harcourt was led away in silence, his footsteps echoing down the marble hall. Poirot watched until he vanished from sight, then turned once more toward the fire, where the last glow flickered and died. The case, he said quietly, is finished. But the ghosts of Briarwood, they will linger. Some houses, Hastings, are built not of brick and mortar, but of sorrow. He straightened his cuffs, smoothing away the wrinkles, and in that small gesture, calm and exact, the order returned. The world once again aligned with the geometry of his little grey cells. But behind his immaculate composure, a shadow of melancholy lingered, faint and inescapable, like the echo of a secret too human to be solved. And outside, as the mist finally broke apart, the wind carried with it the faint scent of violets. The day waned slowly, its light waning with the pale exhaustion that comes after too much grief. The house, once proud in its silence, now stood hollow, drained of its secrets yet still trembling with what had been spoken. But Poirot was not finished. He sat alone in the library, the shutters drawn, the lamps burning low. There was a stillness about him, the kind that preceded revelation. His eyes rested on the portrait above the mantel, Lady Whitcomb's painted calm, her faint smile, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He had all the pieces, yes, but something still pulsed beneath the surface, quiet and malignant. A shadow not yet named. Harcourt's confession had explained much, and yet not all. A man like Sir Reginald did not build his empire on a single lie. There were layers still unseen. And somewhere in those layers the final truth waited. Patient, dangerous. The door opened softly. Hastings entered, his expression uneasy. "They've taken Harcourt to Guildford," he said. He didn't resist. "Clara's been asking for you." Poirot inclined his head. "And what does Mademoiselle wish of me?" "She says there's something she needs to tell you," Hastings replied. "Something her mother told her before she died." Poirot's eyes flickered. "Ah, the dead, Hastings. They always speak most clearly when the living at last are willing to listen." He rose, adjusting his cuffs, and followed Hastings up the great staircase. The air grew colder as they climbed, the hall heavy with the scent of damp linen and extinguished candles. Clara waited in her mother's room, sitting beside the unmade bed. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice faint but steady, "I've remembered something that didn't seem important before." "Then it is certainly important," Poirot said gently. "Tell me." She hesitated. "The night before Father died, Mother and I spoke. She told me there was someone else who knew her secret, someone she feared. I thought she meant you or Colonel Grant, but now I think she meant someone else entirely." "Someone else?" Poirot's tone sharpened. "Who, mademoiselle?" "I don't know," Clara whispered. "But she said this person had come to the house years ago, a guest. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should look for the one who wrote the letters." Poirot went very still. "Letters?" he repeated. "Not the ones burned in the study? Others?" Clara nodded. "She said they were hidden. She never told me where." Poirot turned toward the window, his mind already moving through the map of the house, the study, the drawing room, the corridors of servants' rooms. His eyes narrowed as a memory stirred, the faint scent of violets lingering not just in Sir Reginald's study but elsewhere. Faint, familiar. "The one who wrote the letters," he murmured. "Ah, mon Dieu, of course." He turned abruptly. "Mademoiselle, stay here. Hastings, come with me." They descended swiftly to the ground floor, the echo of their steps sharp against the stone. Poirot's pace was brisk, his focus absolute. He led the way through the corridor to the servants' quarters, past the kitchen and the narrow stair to the cellars. The lamps flickered weakly against the damp. "Poirot," Hastings said, uneasy, "what is it you expect to find down here?" "The final piece," Poirot murmured. "That which has been hiding in plain sight. The author of the letters, the hand that stirred every silence in this house." He stopped before a small wooden door, almost forgotten behind stacked crates. He reached out, turned the handle, unlocked. The hinges creaked. Inside was a cramped office, a narrow desk, shelves stacked with papers, ledgers and correspondence. The butler's domain, yes, but something more. Poirot moved toward the desk and began to sort through its drawers, his fingers deft, precise. In the lowest drawer, beneath a false bottom, he found them, a bundle of letters bound with red string. The paper yellowed, the handwriting elegant, controlled. He untied the string and read the first line aloud. "My dearest Reginald, our bargain must remain secret, or all is lost." Hastings frowned. "A bargain?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Not between Sir Reginald and Lady Whitcomb, Hastings. Between Sir Reginald and another. The one who helped him forge the past. The one who created the illusion of Edward Hale's death, and allowed Harcourt to vanish into his new life." He looked up sharply. It was not Harcourt who forged the documents, nor Lady Whitcomb who concealed them. It was another who profited from both their lies. Before Hastings could reply, a sound echoed behind them, a slow clap, deliberate, mocking. Inspector Graves stood in the doorway, his face shadowed by the lamplight. "Very clever, Poirot," he said evenly, "but I'm afraid you've come to that conclusion a little too late." Hastings froze. "Graves! What the devil?" Poirot did not turn. "Ah," he said softly, "so the mask falls at last." Graves stepped into the room, revolver in hand. "You were always too perceptive for your own good. I knew it the moment you questioned the checks, the handwriting. You saw the pattern I thought I'd erased." Hastings stared at him. "You? But you were investigating the case." Graves gave a small, humourless laugh. "Yes, investigating it to keep it contained. Sir Reginald paid me well for that. Years ago, when I was still just a clerk at Scotland Yard. He needed someone to bury Edward Hale's file, to forge the death certificate, to make sure no one asked questions. When the old man died, I thought it was over. But Harcourt's confession, Lady Whitcomb's weakness, it all threatened to come undone." Poirot turned now, his voice calm as ever. "So you returned to Briarwood, wearing the badge of the law you once betrayed." Graves smiled thinly. "And you, Poirot, were never supposed to see beyond the surface, but you always do, don't you? You see the dust others ignore, the thread others overlook. I should have stopped you sooner." Poirot stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "But you did not, mon ami, because you wanted to be admired. You wanted your handiwork to be seen, even if it risked exposure. That is the vanity of every criminal who believes himself cleverer than justice." Graves' hand tightened on the revolver. "You're wrong. I wanted peace. I was done with these people and their sins. But when I saw the Colonel's letter, when I realised the truth was going to reach London—" "You killed him," Poirot finished quietly. "And then you framed Dacre, knowing the poor man's desperation would destroy him faster than any trial could." Graves' face twisted. "He was a small price to pay for keeping the world clean." Poirot's voice dropped, low and steady. "No, Inspector. You killed because you feared the truth would unmake the story you had written for yourself. You believed yourself the hand of order, but in truth, you are its greatest corruption." For a moment the room was utterly still, only the faint crackle of the lamp between them. Then, very slowly, Poirot lifted his hand and placed it on the edge of the desk. "I must warn you," he said softly. "There are constables outside. I sent them to search the perimeter, but I instructed one to return when the clock struck 9. It is now 10 minutes past. They will be here soon." Graves's eyes darted toward the door. "You're bluffing." "Perhaps," Poirot said mildly. "But I would not risk it were I you. The law may forgive a delay, but not an assault upon its guest." Graves hesitated, a fraction too, long. In that heartbeat, Poirot nodded slightly toward Hastings. Hastings, grasping the signal, moved with sudden speed, striking the inspector's arm. The gun went off, the shot splintering the desk, and Graves stumbled back. Within seconds the door burst open and 2 constables seized him. The revolver clattered to the floor. Graves fought for a moment, then sagged, breathless, defeated. His eyes met Poirot's. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "I tried to make it right. I tried to end it all before it spread." Poirot regarded him with pity. "Ah, but you forget, Inspector. Truth is not a contagion one can contain. It survives every fire." They led Graves away, his footsteps fading into the corridor. Poirot turned back to the desk where the bundle of letters lay open. He touched them lightly, almost reverently. "It is finished," Hastings said quietly. Poirot shook his head. "Non, Hastings. Justice is finished, but peace, that is another matter entirely." Outside, the wind had stilled at last, and the manor seemed to exhale. The fog was lifting, the first fragile light of dawn filtering through the trees. Poirot stood a long moment in silence, the faint scent of violets drifting once more through the air, the final ghost of Briarwood fading into the morning. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the lawns of Briarwood slick with dew, and the scent of damp earth rising through the open windows. The house at last seemed to breathe again, freed of its burden, or so everyone thought. The constables had gone. Inspector Graves had been escorted away under heavy guard, and silence had reclaimed the hallways. Poirot sat at the breakfast table, his cup of chocolate untouched, his gaze fixed upon the grey light that filtered through the curtains. Hastings entered, his step lighter now that the ordeal seemed behind them. "It's over at last," he said, with a tone of relief that bordered on triumph. "I dare say it's one of your finest cases, Poirot. Quite extraordinary. The inspector himself. I'd never have suspected him." Poirot did not reply. He was studying the delicate spiral of steam rising from his cup, his expression unreadable. Hastings frowned. You don't seem satisfied." Poirot looked up slowly, his eyes thoughtful, almost sorrowful. "My friend, when one closes a case too neatly, it often means the truth has slipped away in the final sweep of the broom." Hastings blinked. "What on earth do you mean by that? We've got the letters, the motive, the confession." "Oui," Poirot interrupted softly. "And yet, something remains misplaced. A thread I cannot tuck away no matter how I try." Before Hastings could question him further, a knock sounded at the door. A young constable stood there, raincoat glistening. "Message for you, sir," he said, handing Poirot a small folded note. "From Guildford Jail." Poirot unfolded it carefully, scanning the brief. Lines. His brows drew together, then lifted in quiet astonishment. Without a word, he rose from the table. "What is it?" Hastings asked. Poirot's voice was low. "It appears that our Inspector Graves is dead." Hastings stared. "Dead? But how?" "An hour ago," Poirot murmured. "Poison. A small flask of laudanum hidden in his coat lining. A man who intends to confess does not bring poison with him, Hastings. Someone ensured that he would never speak again." The shock hung in the air between them. Hastings found his voice first. "Then? Someone else was involved?" Poirot's eyes glinted with a terrible calm. "No, not merely involved. In command." Within the hour they were back at Briarwood, the house once more shrouded in unease. Clara met them at the door, her face pale. "Is it true? That Inspector Graves—" Poirot raised a hand. "It is true, mademoiselle, but there is something you must tell me. Last night, after we left you, did anyone come to see you?" She hesitated. "Yes, one of the constables. He said he was collecting a statement for the record. I thought nothing of it." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Describe him." "A tall man," she said uncertainly. "Dark hair. He had a kind voice, though he seemed nervous. He asked about my mother's letters, and when I said they'd been given to you, he thanked me and left." Poirot's fingers drummed once upon his cane. "There was no such man, mademoiselle." Clara's breath caught. "Then, who was he?" "That," Poirot said softly, "is what I intend to discover." He moved through the house again, each step deliberate, his eyes noting details others overlooked. The faint scuff marks near the study door, the missing page from the guest ledger in the hall, the slight misalignment of a drawer in the writing desk. Every fragment seemed to breathe the same faint question. Who had gained the most from silence? He stopped suddenly before the portrait of Lady Whitcomb. Its painted gaze met his own, serene, unchanging. Beneath it, the mantel clock ticked softly. Poirot lifted it down, opened its back, and withdrew a folded sheet of paper hidden within. Hastings leaned closer. "What's that?" Poirot read the heading aloud. "Account transfer, Hale Trust, beneficiary, Clara Whitcomb." His voice dropped. "Dated 2 days after Sir Reginald's death." Hastings gaped. "But that's impossible. It couldn't have been arranged after his death." "Unless," Poirot murmured, "someone else continued his arrangements." He looked toward the doorway, where Clara stood, trembling. "Mademoiselle, do you recognize this document?" Her eyes flicked to it and widened. "That's Mother's handwriting." Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, but not entirely. Look here." He held the page closer, pointing to the signature. "The curve of the C is perfect, too perfect. This is not the trembling hand of a grieving daughter. It is a hand practiced in imitation." "Are you saying someone forged it?" Hastings whispered. Poirot's gaze turned toward Clara, his voice gentle but grave. "No, Hastings. I am saying she wrote it. But not for her mother." Clara's lips parted, a small gasp escaping. "I don't understand." "Oh, but you do," Poirot said softly. "You understand very well. You were not the innocent child of tragedy, mademoiselle. You were its architect. When you learned your true parentage, when you realized that Sir Reginald had deceived your mother and ruined your father, you resolved to end it all. But not merely to avenge her. No, you meant to inherit everything he denied you." Clara's face had gone white, but she said nothing. "You knew your mother's mind was breaking," Poirot went on, his tone like a slow unravelling thread. "You planted the idea that Sir Reginald meant to expose her, to drive her to act before he could. Then, when she shot him, you were ready. You staged the scene, you moved the key, You forged the letters. You ensured suspicion would fall upon Harcourt, upon Dacre, upon anyone but yourself. Hastings looked stricken. Poirot, surely she couldn't. Poirot's eyes never left Clara. When Harcourt threatened to confess, you enlisted Graves, the man who had once hidden your father's disgrace, to suppress the truth. You promised him money, perhaps even loyalty. But when he became a liability, you sent your messenger to deliver the final dose, poison, quiet and efficient. And now, mademoiselle, you stand to inherit not only Briarwood, but all that remains of Sir Reginald's fortune cleansed by the ashes of his guilt. Clara took a step back, trembling. That's not true. You forget, mademoiselle, Poirot said softly, that you told me one thing no one else could have known. You said your mother told you of the one who wrote the letters, but she never said that name aloud to anyone. You invented the memory to mislead me, and in doing so, you revealed yourself. Her eyes flashed with sudden, desperate fury. You can't prove any of it! Ah, Poirot said quietly, but I can. You see, the ink on this transfer document, it is not yet a day old. The chemical smell remains. You wrote it last night, after Graves's arrest. You believed the danger past, and so you allowed yourself the luxury of completion. For a long, terrible moment, the room was utterly still. Then Clara's shoulders sagged. You think you're so clever, she whispered. You talk about justice, but what justice was there for her? For me? My whole life was a lie built on his cruelty. I only wanted to finish what she began. Poirot's expression softened, though his voice remained steady. Ah, mademoiselle, but that is where you're mistaken. Your mother killed out of love. Love twisted, yes, but love still. You killed out of hate, and hate, it does not cleanse, it only poisons. Her composure broke. The tears came silently, her hands trembling as she sank into the nearest chair. Outside, a constable's whistle sounded faintly in the distance, growing nearer. Poirot turned toward the window, speaking almost to himself. It is curious, Hastings. The human heart, so fragile, yet it is always the final conspirator. We chase the mind that plans, the hand that kills, but in the end it is always the heart that confesses. When the constables entered, Clara did not resist. She rose quietly, her face pale but calm. "Will they hang me, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked softly. Poirot regarded her with deep sadness. "No, mademoiselle, they will not hang you, but you will live, and that, perhaps, is the heavier sentence." As she was led away, Poirot stood once more before the window. The rain had begun again, soft and relentless, veiling the gardens in silver mist. Hastings joined him, shaken. "I can't believe it," he murmured. "After everything, she was behind it all." Poirot's voice was low, reflective. "Yes, Hastings, the final act of a tragedy written long before her birth. The sins of the fathers, the grief of the mothers, all written into the hearts of their children. Briarwood was not cursed, mon ami. It was only human." The wind sighed through the open window, carrying once again the faint, elusive fragrance of violets. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment, listening to it fade, and then turned away. The case, at last, complete. The day of Clara Whitcomb's trial dawned bleak and silent, as if the world itself hesitated to pass judgment. A faint fog clung to the streets of London, softening the edges of buildings, muting the clatter of carriages. Poirot stood outside the courthouse, his gloved hands folded neatly over his cane, watching as the police van rolled past him. Inside, behind the narrow bars of the window, Clara sat motionless, her face turned away from the glass. There was no defiance left in her now, only a strange, cold serenity. Hastings joined him, breath misting in the morning air. "Hard to believe, isn't it?" he said quietly. "She doesn't look like a murderer at all." Poirot's gaze remained fixed on the van as it disappeared around the corner. "Non, Hastings. Few murderers ever do. The face of guilt, it is often the face of grief, of longing, of something unfinished in the soul." They walked together toward the courthouse steps. "Do you think she'll be convicted?" Hastings asked. Poirot gave a small shrug. "The English law, she is most strict. It will depend on whether the jury sees the heart or the hand. But whatever the verdict, the punishment has already begun. That, mon ami, is the part justice never counts. The slow weight of one's own conscience." Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with silence. Reporters scratched their pens, spectators leaned forward, and the judges' gavel echoed like a heartbeat. Clara sat between her barristers, her eyes fixed on the polished wood of the dock. Poirot watched her from the gallery, his expression unreadable. When she rose to give her statement, the room held its breath. Her voice, when it came, was calm, almost detached. "I loved my mother," she said simply, "and I loved the truth, but I didn't know they were enemies until it was too late." There were no tears, no dramatic appeals, only quiet words that seemed to dissolve into the air. When she finished, the silence that followed felt endless. The trial lasted 3 days. Poirot attended each one, though he rarely spoke. He observed the proceedings with the same meticulous patience he had shown from the beginning, occasionally leaning to whisper a correction to Hastings about a timeline, a phrase, a motive. When the verdict was finally delivered, guilty of manslaughter, not murder, there was a strange murmur through the courtroom, neither relief nor outrage, merely exhaustion. Outside, the crowd dispersed slowly. Hastings exhaled. "So that's it then. It's over." But Poirot did not move. His eyes followed the grey clouds gathering above the courthouse, his mind still turning, as if some detail remained unresolved. "Non," he said at last. "It is finished only for the newspapers, Hastings. For me, there is one question that remains unanswered." Hastings frowned. "A question? But you've solved it all. Graves, Harcourt, Lady Whitcomb, Clara. What's left?" Poirot's lips curved in that faint, familiar smile. "Ah, mon ami, there's always one thread left to examine. Tell me, who first summoned me to Briarwood?" "You were contacted by Lady Whitcomb herself," Hastings said. "She wrote to you in London." Poirot nodded slowly. "So it seemed. But the letter, did it not strike you as curious? No signature, no date, only the line, 'Justice sleeps beneath my roof.' You remember?" Hastings blinked. "Yes, but surely that was just her poetic way of—" "Non, non," Poirot raised a finger. "Lady Whitcomb's education was fine, yes, but she was not poetic. The phrasing, the form, it was calculated. Someone else wrote that letter, someone who wished me to come, to see what they wish me to see." Hastings stared at him. "You mean someone invited you to uncover it all?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Mais oui. The hand that exposed the truth did so with purpose. But which hand, eh? The obvious answer is the clever one, and the clever answer is rarely the true one." He turned away, gazing down the fog-veiled street. "When Inspector Graves was poisoned, we assumed Clara had arranged it. Yet she had no access to his cell. The poison, laudanum, hidden in the lining of his coat, was prepared before he ever arrived at the jail. There was someone else who ensured his silence, someone who understood every step of my investigation." Hastings frowned deeply. "But who could that be? Everyone else connected to the case is either dead or under arrest." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Exactly." They stood there for a long moment, the truth settling slowly between them like ash. Finally Hastings spoke, his voice unsteady. "You can't mean Harcourt. He's still in custody. He confessed." Poirot shook his head. "Harcourt confessed to his part in the past, yes, but not to the recent crimes. His mind, it is that of a man who wishes to bear guilt, not create it. Non, Hastings, the true author of this tragedy is someone who understood that by removing Graves, they could erase every trace of their complicity." Hastings' voice was hushed. "Then who, Poirot? Who?" Poirot turned slowly toward him, his expression grave. "The solicitor? Hastings, the man who handled the Whitcomb estate. He arranged every transfer, forged every document, and ensured the funds flowed cleanly through the Hale Trust. Graves was his accomplice in the beginning, Harcourt his servant, Lady Whitcomb his shield. When the truth threatened to emerge, he used them all like pieces upon a board." Hastings felt a chill run down his spine. "But you never mentioned a solicitor." "Ah, but I did," Poirot said softly. "Once. When I examined the letters Harcourt burned, I noted a name upon the corner of one page. A. Merion, Esky. You dismissed it as an attorney's signature. So did I at first. But Merion's name appeared again upon the transfer papers Clara forged, only this time the ink was fresh. She was not forging for herself, Hastings. She was finishing the work of another. Hastings' voice dropped. So Merion, he's still out there? Poirot's eyes darkened. Oui, and he will not be found easily. A man like that does not vanish in fear. He vanishes in preparation. Perhaps even now he reads of the trial's conclusion and smiles. He knows that with Graves and Clara gone, there are no witnesses left to speak against him. Hastings swallowed hard. Then he's escaped justice. Poirot looked away, his voice low and steady. For now, yes. But evil, mon ami, it is like perfume. It cannot be hidden forever. The smallest trace lingers. One day, somewhere, Monsieur Merion will write again, and the scent of his handiwork will reach my little grey cells once more. They began to walk down the misty street, the courthouse fading behind them. You'll keep searching for him, won't you? Hastings asked quietly. Poirot's smile returned, small and precise. Until my mind rests, yes. For now, I have left a letter at Scotland Yard. Should any estate in England bear the name Merion, they will inform me at once. As they turned the corner, the fog thickened, swallowing the light of the lamps. A church bell tolled the hour, slow, mournful, deliberate. Poirot paused, his gaze distant. You see, Hastings, he murmured, the truth is not always a victory. Sometimes it is a debt that must be carried forward. Justice, she is slow, but she never sleeps. They walked on in silence, their footsteps echoing softly against the stones. Far behind them, the courthouse clock struck once more, and in the stillness that followed, the story of Briarwood seemed at last to close, though somewhere beyond the veil of fog a single hand still turned the wheels of deceit, waiting for its time to begin again. The train to London was due to depart at 11, its whistle already echoing faintly through the damp air as Poirot and Hastings stood upon the platform. The fog had not lifted since morning, clinging stubbornly to the fields beyond, curling around the iron rails like a living thing reluctant to let go. Hastings shuffled his feet, hands in his pockets, still uneasy despite the case being, at least officially, concluded. He glanced at Poirot, who stood immaculate as ever, his luggage neatly arranged, his gloves unblemished by travel or time. Yet there was a faint shadow behind his eyes, a quiet unrest that even victory could not dispel. It's strange, Hastings said after a moment. You've done it again, solved the unsolvable, brought the truth to light, and yet you don't seem pleased, not like you usually are. Poirot smiled faintly, his moustache lifting just so. Ah, mon ami, it is not dissatisfaction. It is reflection. You see, in this case, we did not merely uncover a murderer, we uncovered an entire web spun by generations. Such things, they do not end. They merely rest. Hastings frowned. Rest? You think Merion will resurface? Poirot's gaze lingered on the horizon, where the fog swallowed the world in grey. He is too clever to stay hidden forever. A man who believes himself above consequence always reveals his hand again. But it is not Merion who troubles me, Hastings. It is something smaller, subtler, a note that does not quite resolve. What do you mean? Poirot tapped his cane lightly against the platform. Do you remember the letter that summoned me to Briarwood? The one that began all of this? Of course. Justice sleeps beneath my roof, wasn't it? Oui, Poirot said softly. And do you recall what I told you when we examined it? Hastings thought for a moment. You said it was written by someone else, that it wasn't Lady Whitcomb's hand. Exactement. I was certain then, and I remain certain now. But tell me, Hastings, who in the end would have known enough to write it? Hastings hesitated. Well, Merion, perhaps. He was behind everything. Poirot shook his head. No, Merion would never draw me into the affair voluntarily. He was too careful. No, that letter was written by someone who wanted me there. Someone who believed that truth, once found, would cleanse what was rotten. Someone with both knowledge and remorse. But who could that be? Hastings asked, bewildered. Lady Whitcomb was dead. Harcourt was in custody. Clara was hiding her guilt. And Graves was, well, buried in corruption. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, his voice dropping to a murmur. There was one more person, Hastings. One whose presence everyone forgot to question because it seemed too ordinary. The train whistled again, long and low, but Poirot made no move to board. Do you remember the housekeeper, Mrs. Vale? Hastings blinked. Good heavens, yes. I'd almost forgotten her. She vanished after the fire, didn't she? You said she'd been dismissed weeks before we arrived." "Ah," Poirot said quietly. "That was what we were told. But I have since made inquiries. The woman calling herself Mrs. Vale was not employed at Briarwood until after the first scandal, after Edward Hale's supposed death. Before that, she served in London under another name entirely. I found it this morning in the records at Scotland Yard." He drew a folded paper from his coat and handed it to Hastings. It bore a name in careful script: Elizabeth Merion. Hastings' eyes widened. Merion? His wife? "His widow," Poirot corrected. "Or perhaps not so much a widow as a co-conspirator. You see, she was the one who kept the household running, who saw every document, every cheque, every transfer. She knew Harcourt's handwriting, Lady Whitcomb's weakness, Graves's dependence. She was the silent observer of all their sins, and when the moment came she summoned me." "But why?" Hastings demanded. "If she was involved, why expose her husband's crimes?" Poirot's expression darkened. "Because she feared him. Men like Merion do not share power, even with those who help them. I believe she saw what was coming, the noose tightening around all of them, and sought to protect herself through me. She believed that by setting the wheels of justice in motion, she could step away unseen. And perhaps she has." Hastings swallowed hard. "Do you think she's still alive?" Poirot's gaze shifted toward the fog once more. "Alive? Yes. But not here. She's vanished, cleverly, carefully. There was a woman who purchased a ticket to Calais 2 days before Clara's trial, travelling under the name Elise Vaillant. The description, dark eyes, silver hair, a limp in the left leg, matches our Mrs. Vale precisely. Scotland Yard confirmed the record." Hastings stared. "Then she's out there, free." Poirot nodded slowly. "Free, perhaps, but never unburdened. That is the true curse of the clever criminal, Hastings. They outwit the law, but not themselves." The whistle shrieked again. Poirot turned toward the waiting train, the faintest sigh escaping him. "Come, mon ami, London awaits us. There are always other mysteries." They boarded, the compartment empty save for their luggage. As the train began to move, the countryside slid past in blurs of grey and green. Hastings watched Poirot silently for a time, then said, "You'll find her one day, won't you?" Poirot smiled faintly, eyes half closed. "If she wishes to be found, yes. But some ghosts, Hastings, prefer to haunt from afar." For a while they rode in silence, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels the only sound. Poirot sat motionless, lost in thought, until something flickered at the edge of his vision, a folded newspaper lying on the seat opposite. He picked it up idly, unfolding it with his usual care. His eyes fell upon a small notice buried in the classifieds, a few lines only, printed in the smallest type. "To MP. The garden sleeps again. The violets bloom. Justice is patient." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The words were nothing to an ordinary reader, but to him they were as clear as a signature. The initials, MP, and the phrase about violets. The same flowers that had haunted Briarwood. The same words Lady Whitcomb once used when describing her regrets. He folded the paper neatly, placing it into his coat pocket. "Ah," he murmured, "so the lady writes again. Perhaps to me, perhaps to her accomplice. But she writes." Hastings, oblivious, gazed out the window. "Strange thing, cases like these," he said. "You tie up every loose end, and still they don't quite feel finished." Poirot's smile returned, small and knowing. "Mais oui, Hastings. Because murder, it is never about an ending. It is about what remains after. The echoes, the stains, the silence. That is why I listen, even when the world believes the case is closed." The train roared into a tunnel, the world outside vanishing into darkness. For a moment only the hum of motion and the flicker of passing lamps filled the air. Poirot leaned back, his reflection faint in the window glass, an image framed in shadow, eyes glinting with thought. When they emerged once more into light, the fog had cleared. London lay ahead, vast and alive, its skyline faint against the dawn. Poirot adjusted his hat, eyes still lingering on the distant horizon. "A mystery may sleep, Hastings," he said softly, "but it never dies." And as the train thundered onward toward the city, the faint scent of violets, impossible, unreal, seemed to drift once more through the compartment, a reminder that justice, like truth, is only ever borrowed from time,